All right, we are going to start solving absolute value equations. In order to solve an absolute value equation, we have to understand what is absolute value. Absolute value is the distance a number is away from zero. So, for example, the symbol that we use are these two up and down lines, perfectly straight up and down. So here I'm looking at, I have absolute value of 4. So what that basically says is, how far is 4 from 0? And that answer, of course, would be 4 units. So the absolute value of 4 is equal to 4. You can do it with something else. For example, absolute value of a negative 5. Well, the absolute value of a negative 5 is asking how far is negative 5 from 0? And that is 5 units away. Okay? The absolute value of a number will always equal a positive number because distance is always positive. So whenever you're going out and let's say you're running a mile, if you run that mile forward, you ran a mile. If you turn around and for some reason you say, I'm going to run it backwards, you still ran a mile even though you ran it backwards. It's still a positive distance. Okay? So let's take this a step further then. What if I asked you this question? The absolute value of x is equal to 5. So what I'm asking there is, what are the values of x that would equal 5? That would make this sentence true? Well, hopefully you realize there are two of them. There is a positive 5, that is 5 units away from 0, and there is a negative 5, that are 5 units away from 0. So therefore, the absolute value of x is equal to 5 actually has two solutions. There is a positive case, x equals 5, and there is the negative case, x equals negative 5, because both of those are 5 units away from 0, the distance they are away from 0. So we're going to use that positive case and negative case situation to solve absolute value equations. So, steps to solving an absolute value equation go as this. Step number 1, isolate the absolute value, meaning on one side you want nothing but what's inside the absolute value. Nothing can be outside of it. On the other side is everything else. Okay? Now, this little note I left you here, remember an absolute value cannot equal a negative number. So if you have isolated the absolute value and it comes out equaling a negative value, then you know it is a no solution answer. So the example here is I've simplified my absolute value. And if you notice, it's equaling a negative value. And therefore, that would be a no solution. So always be on the lookout of that. But make sure you have isolated the absolute value before looking at that. So step number 1, we isolate the absolute value. We get the absolute value completely by itself. Step number 2, we split the equation into the two cases, a positive case and a negative case. Step number 3, we solve each of the new equations. Step number 4, we check both of your answers to make sure they make the equation true, that we didn't do something silly in there. So let's give it a shot. So if we look at number 1 here, I have the absolute value of x minus 5 is equal to 8. So if you notice, the absolute value is completely isolated. I don't have to do anything there on that first step. So my next step then is I'm going to separate it into the two cases. So I have x minus 5 equals 8, or I have x minus 5 equals a negative 8. At this point now, we're going to go ahead and solve both of them. So on the left-hand side, I need to add my 5. And that would get me x equals 13. Or on the right-hand side, I'm going to add my 5. And x would equal negative 3. Okay, if we take both of those answers and plug them back in. So 13 minus 5, that's 8. Absolute value of 8 is 8. So that answer worked out perfect. Plug in negative 3. Negative 3 minus 5 is negative 8. Absolute value of that is a positive 8. So that one also worked out. So both of those answers are true. Okay, let's try number 2. Notice here again, my absolute value part, the part inside, is completely isolated. So then what we're going to do is we're going to get rid of the absolute value signs by splitting it into the two pieces, the two different cases. There's my positive case. Here's my negative case. Now at this point, we start to solve. So I'm going to add 4. I'm going to add 4. So I'm left with 2x equals 10. I'm going to divide by 2. I'm going to divide by 2. And I get x equals 5. On the other side, I go through the process again. I add my 4, add my 4. Then I divide by 2, divide by 2. And x equals -1. Now let's check it just to make sure. If I plug 5 in, 2 times 5 is 10. 10 minus 4 is 6. The absolute value of 6 is 6. That one worked out perfect. Plug in the -1. 2 times -1 is -2. -2 minus 4 is a -6. Absolute value of that is 6. So both of those worked out perfect. All right, let's try number 3. So on number 3, we start off and we say, okay, my absolute value is isolated, but something should be going off in your head here right away. We end up getting an absolute value equal to -12. So there are two things that can happen here. If you don't recognize that and solve it down, your answers are not going to work. So that's why it's pretty vital to check your answers. But if you recognize that right away, you know right away this is a no solution answer. Okay? So because an absolute value cannot equal a negative value. Okay? Number 4. Now all of a sudden we have something that we need to get rid of. So here is my absolute value, but I have this +3 on the front. So to get rid of that, I'm going to -3 from both sides. And that gives me absolute value of 4x plus 6 equals 30. Now we have our absolute value isolated, so now I'm going to separate. So 4x plus 6 equals 30, or 4x plus 6 equals a -30. At this point now, we start solving, so I minus my 6. So that would get me 4x is equal to 24. I then take and divide by 4, and that's going to give us x equals 6. Over here on this side, I'm going to take and I'm going to minus my 6 from both sides. So 4x is equal to a -36. Divide by 4. And that's going to give me x equals -9. Now, we should test those, plug them back into the original, and see if they work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to plug the 6 in first. So 4 times 6 is 24, plus 6 is 30. Absolute value of that is 30, plus 3 is 33. Great, that one worked out perfect. Now let's try the -9. 4 times -9 is -36. -36 plus 6 is -30. Absolute value of that is a +30, plus 3 is 33. Both of those worked out perfect. Okay, let's continue on. Let's go ahead and solve number 5. So the first thing we notice is we've got a lot of work to do to get the absolute value isolated. So just like what we did before, we would look at this and say, okay, who is least connected to that absolute value there? And the answer would be this -6. So to get rid of that, I'm going to add my 6 to both sides. So then I get -2, absolute value of x plus 9, and that equals -6. Okay, still not isolated because I have that -2 times that. So to undo that, I divide by the -2. Now I'm left with absolute value of x plus 9 is equal to 3. Now we're ready to split it. So I have my two cases, x plus 9 equals 3, or x plus 9 equals -3. We minus our 9, minus our 9. And that's going to get us x equals negative 6. Or minus our 9, minus our 9. X equals negative 12. You could check that by plugging it back in. So like if we do the negative 6, it'd be negative 6 plus 9, which is 3. Absolute value of that is 3. 3 times the negative 2 is negative 6. Minus 6 would get me negative 12. Works out perfect. Same thing if I plug in the negative 12. Negative 12 plus 9 is negative 3. Absolute value of that is 3. 3 times negative 2 is negative 6. Minus 6. That would give me negative 12. All right, last one here we're going to try. So if you notice, once again, we have some stuff we need to get rid of to isolate our absolute value. So the first thing I'm going to get rid of is the 8. So I'm going to minus my 8. So now I have 4. Absolute value of 2x minus 6 is equal to 16. Then at that point, I'm going to divide by my 4. Now we have absolute value of 2x minus 6 equals 4. Now we split it, so 2x minus 6 equals 4, or 2x minus 6 equals negative 4. Now we're ready to solve, so we're going to add our 6 to both sides. So we get 2x is equal to 10. We're going to divide by 2 to both sides, and we get x equals 5. Over here, we're going to add our 6 to both sides. That's going to get me 2x is equal to 2. I'm going to divide that by 2. X equals 1. So we look at that. If I wanted to check it, 5 times 2 is 10. 10 minus 6 is 4. 4 times absolute value of 4 is 4. Times 4 is 16. Plus 8 is 24. Plug in the 1. 2 times 1 is 2. Minus 6 is negative 4. Absolute value of that is 4. Times the 4 is 16, plus the 8 is 24. And that's how we solve an absolute value equation.